Welcome to Close of Business. I'm Alicia Barry. The Reserve Bank shocked markets and economists by not delivering a July rate cut. Now the RBA governor has cooled expectations of rate relief in August, cautioning it's dependent on further falls in inflation. We'll explore how the property market is reacting in a moment, but first, this report from Rihanna Whitson.
Finding friendly faces after copping criticism for the Reserve Bank's shock decision to leave interest rates on hold. Michelle Bullock defiant in the face of unemployment hitting a 4-year high.
Do you think the board's decision may have been different had it had access to that unemployment data ahead of the last meeting?
No, I don't believe so, Michael. I think the monthly numbers pop up and down.
The RBA doesn't expect the jobs market to deteriorate.
The forward-looking indicators, including vacancies, including layoff rates, including the information we're getting from Liaison, aren't suggesting that anything's falling off a cliff anytime soon.
Michelle Bullock admitting underlying inflation could take a little longer to tame. But she is excited about new and improved monthly CPI data coming later this year.
Yay, ABS. Very, very happy. It'll bring us into line with most other advanced economies now.
In the suburbs, where mortgage pain is real, Australians are more concerned about paying the bills.
I've got 3 children and the mortgage rates are out of control. Crazy, really hard to afford anything at the moment.
Frustration over the cash rate lingers.
Hopefully they'll be cut next month. That would make life a lot easier for everyone, I think. We might be able to go on a holiday or afford for the kids to have their extracurricular activities.
Obviously hoping it drops. You know, cost of living is through the roof. It's not easy.
The need for urgent rate relief is also on the minds of the now mortgage-free.
It does worry me because it's not what we wanted to see for our children. But sadly, that's reality at the moment.
Attention now turns to what the Reserve Bank will do next. Most economists are forecasting a rate cut next month if inflation continues to ease. All 4 big banks are expecting another cut in November, with Westpac and NAB expecting a third in February.
We do have forecasts in August, November and February taking the cash rate to 3.10, but I wouldn't say anything is predictable or a sure thing, and I guess that's what we learned with this last meeting, and we are continuing to see ongoing uncertainty coming from offshore.
The RBA says it's ready for any global shocks and is closely watching the independence of the US Central Bank.
I can't speak for what goes through Mr. Trump's mind. I'm not sure anyone can.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
An unpredictable power with the global economy on edge.
Temperatures may be down, but house prices are continuing their upward march. Sydney's median house prices just hit a new median record of $1.7 million, with strong growth in all capitals but Canberra and Darwin. Head of research for Cotality, Eliza Owen, says 2 rate cuts so far this year and more to come will see prices going just one way. Eliza, we have seen no promises from the RBA Governor Michelle Bullock that she will deliver a rate cut next month. But even so, we're seeing the property market at record levels. What is driving it?
Well, we have already had 2 rate reductions, which I think has really helped to move the market along. In fact, the first monthly increase that we saw in 2025 coincided with the Feb cut, the May cut. That's boosted borrowing capacity as well. And I think it's also the expectation that there will be more rate cuts this year. While the August meeting isn't a guarantee, between the monthly inflation trend showing a lower result, weaker retail sales reads, and the recent higher unemployment levels that we saw come through, I think it is looking more certain that if not August, at least a couple more cuts this year.
Well, as Michelle Bullock herself said, it's not the time, but it is the direction likely down. What has been driving the gains in the market that we've seen in the middle of winter?
So we've seen about a 1.5% increase in the June quarter. And again, that is largely driven by reduced interest rates. We've also seen constrained supply, not only in the construction space, certainly dwelling approvals have moved lower over the course of the year, but it's in the listings as well. New listings have been lower, not just for winter, but lower than where they would usually be this time of year. In fact, total stock levels across Australia, with about 120,000 listings on the market, is almost 20% lower than where you would usually see it this time of year. So again, kind of coming back to that classic supply-demand dynamic that is driving prices higher, and it's driving things like the auction clearance rate higher as well.
Do we know why that level of stock is so low? Are people not prepared to put their house or unit on the market because they can't, or are they waiting for the spring selling season?
I think they might be waiting for the spring selling season. I think they might be waiting for more rate cuts, and I think they might be waiting for more price growth. We're seeing that where listings aren't as low at the moment, it's traditionally more affordable areas, more peripheral areas that are seeing stronger price growth. That's where sellers seem to be more active at the moment. But your eastern suburbs, North Sydney, Mossman, they've been a bit quieter over the past few weeks, and I think they'll flourish a bit more when the spring selling season comes around.
So when we do see more stock on the market and potentially get a rate cut, does that just mean prices go higher, or do those two things cancel each other out?
Oh, look, you'd have to imagine that prices will move higher. Just because of that pure boost to borrowing capacity. It'll make for more competitive selling conditions. Having said that, though, there are a few things that might keep a bit of a lid on growth. So if we look to the kind of COVID boom, 2020, 2021, you had record low interest rates, prices were a lot lower, and the property market was moving at an average 1.5% per month. This upswing, it's been a lot more subdued, running at about 0.5% a month nationally, and you'd have to imagine that's because of the affordability constraints, even with interest rates now moving a bit lower.
And I was going to ask you about the affordability constraints. We hear that thrown around a lot. What does it mean? People just can't get enough money to buy the house, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the typical income across Australia at the moment, $100,000 a year for the median household's income, based on where mortgage rates are at now, an affordable purchase price would be something like $560,000. The median dwelling value in Australia is closer to $860,000. So there's a big gap between what people can afford and where prices are. You're seeing a lot of demand skewed to cheaper markets as a result. And I think even for those who can afford to get into that higher band, there's some global economic uncertainty, seeing where tariffs land, that could be creating a little bit of hesitancy at the high end as well.
For those who are jumping into the market and buying houses versus units, who's doing better?
So house and unit values are running at a pretty similar rate. Houses doing a little bit better, just because for those that are in the market and can buy houses, they tend to be on higher incomes, and lower interest rates boost their capacity more. In addition to the supply constraints that we've talked about in terms of construction and listings volumes, it seems that houses are winning out just at the moment.
And on the supply side, the fact that we are looking likely to miss the government's target, is there any light at the end of the tunnel when it comes to the availability of supply and affordability matching up at some point?
I mean, the construction space is still very challenged. That's both the fact that you've got constraint on labour and materials, blowing out construction timelines for what is in the pipeline. But if you look at dwelling approvals, they're trending a little bit lower through the start of the year as well, down about 10% in seasonally adjusted terms between January and May. I think we've got an ongoing challenge with supply, and I think the sooner we wake up to that, the more maybe we can pivot our focus back to the demand side of things and say, well, if we want housing to really be more affordable, how do we cool the demand side and maybe bring the market into a bit more balance from that perspective?
Eliza Owen, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Australian businesses are increasingly concerned they've been left in the lurch after the United States walked away from the global minimum tax deal. The man who spearheaded those negotiations says the G7 caved to Donald Trump's demands, giving American businesses preferential tax treatment. Nasim Kadem reports.
A historic agreement to reform the global tax system.
The OECD said a group of 136 countries has agreed to enforce a corporate tax rate.
And the agreement is at least 15%.
It was a deal years in the making, a global minimum tax to try to stop a race to the bottom that's now fallen apart.
What is clear is that countries have caved. They have just not sustained their minimum tax in front of the threats, and the US is getting a competitive advantage.
At the G7 summit, world leaders agreed to exempt US companies from the rules. In exchange, the Trump administration dropped a so-called revenge tax from a major spending bill.
The difficulty is that the US, under President Trump, said, fine, we have our own system, so don't touch us. But the new system is unfair, discriminatory against non-US companies.
It means Australia will no longer be able to apply a top-up tax on US-based multinationals operating locally if they pay a rate of less than 15%. The global minimum tax was supposed to increase Australia's tax receipts by $370 million over 5 years. The federal government said implementing it would be beneficial for our economy and reduce the influence that taxation has on foreign investment decisions.
Yeah, so I've got plenty of those in stock.
Australian startups like Maria Baker's Nobody's Princess are now questioning the value of keeping their business local.
Do I actually have to go to the US and set up my business and be a US-based business? I'd rather not do that because I think there's this really big beauty about being an Australian business and, you know, putting an Australian brand on the stage.
We've been building the cyberpay, right?
The co-founder of tech startup Upcover says there needs to be a level playing field.
We play by the rules. We pay our fair share and we expect others to do as well.
US multinationals and their lobby groups declined to comment, but tax experts fear that the G7 tax backflip could send a bad signal and could give the green light to US multinationals to keep shifting profits to places where they pay less tax.
This basically sends a clear signal to the likes of US big pharma companies, US big tech, that it's okay, that Trump's got their back.
Experts say Australia now needs to work within the new UN Tax Convention, which is intended to address issues like tax avoidance and evasion.
To make sure that multinationals don't continue to steal the funding that we need to fund our healthcare, our hospitals, our public schools, education.
It'll be effectively a treaty to set up tax rules. It will work on a 2/3 majority for substantive matters, so it won't be possible for certain individual countries to derail or block it. Their first thing they're looking at will be taxes on cross-border services, so that will potentially capture these tech companies.
A new arena for the fight to collect more revenue from digital services companies.
Despite Australia's continued success in curbing smoking rates, the illegal tobacco trade is growing. Experts are warning it'll take big fines and a new approach from the federal and state governments to stub out the black market. Adelaide Miller reports.
Just a short walk from John Jensen's caravan park are multiple tobacconists selling illicit cigarettes.
I walk in the shop, I ask for a box of red, and that's what I get. It's in and out, no mucking around.
He says he's been buying them for 6 years after realising how much cheaper they are compared to over-the-counter cigarettes.
Everyone I know is doing it. Everyone I know that smokes is buying illicit tobacco because of the price.
And the price is being pumped up by tax, as high as 70%. Some say that's fueling the black market. In 2023, it was estimated illicit cigarettes made up 28% of the total tobacco trade, contributing to a decline in government revenue, which has plunged from $16.3 billion in 2019 to $7.4 billion. And it's causing mixed messages from politicians.
But I wonder whether we need to look more closely at the federal government's massive excise on tobacco. The massive increase has exploded the illicit tobacco marketplace.
I respectfully disagree with Chris. I don't think the answer here is to make cigarettes cheaper for people. I think the answer here is to get better at compliance.
Professor Becky Freeman says if the government were to lower the tobacco excise, it would send the wrong message.
So the only thing you would be doing is rewarding the very retailers who had flouted the law by allowing them to legally sell cheap cigarettes. We would make smoking more appealing to more people, and we'd be undermining all the public health gains we have made.
She says there are more effective ways the government can target the black market.
The number one thing you should be doing is reducing the number of outlets that sell it. Make your enforcement job a little easier for yourself.
The Albanese government says it spent $350 million tackling the black market over the past 2 years and appointed an illicit tobacco and e-cigarette commissioner to work with all levels of government to coordinate national policies.
Tobacco laws have just come into effect in New South Wales and Victoria, requiring retailers and wholesalers to hold a licence to sell tobacco. They're the last two states to introduce this legislation, and suppliers have until October and February to apply for a permit. But experts say more needs to be done.
You should enable that scheme with the ability to immediately shut down shops that you find selling, to issue massive fines not only to the business owner, but to the landlord who owns that property and leases out that building. And then finally, you should be using this licensing scheme to reduce the number of outlets.
Back in country Victoria, Mr. Jensen says he wants to quit smoking.
I'd love to give up the cigarettes, but I can't afford the nicotine replacement therapy that goes with.
He's calling on the government to make replacement therapies more accessible, something the health minister says is already subsidised.
If they're serious about getting us to quit smoking, making quit smoking products cheaper.
Until then, he says he's trapped in a habit he can't afford to break.
Despite months of jockeying from the White House on trade, Donald Trump has announced just a handful of agreements. But this week, the US inked a trade deal with Japan that cuts tariffs on Japanese imports, including the auto sector, to 15%, down from the original 25%. The US president said it was the result of long and hard negotiations.
I just signed the largest trade deal in history, I think maybe the largest deal in history, with Japan.
The deal includes a $550 billion investment in the United States. Japan's share market surged on the announcement, with the Nikkei up by more than 3% in a rally led by car makers. In contrast, American General Motors' share price slumped on Wall Street after the company announced it took a $1 billion hit in its second quarter earnings as the result of tariffs. To the share market, where the selling picked up toward the end of the week with the banks the targets. By Friday, the ASX 200 index had lost 1%, the broader All Ords down a little less. Kyle Rodda from Capital.com joined me at the end of trade. Kyle, markets had a bit of news to digest from the RBA this week, but the all-important quarterly CPI is out next Wednesday. What do they want to see?
Well, if you look at the statement on monetary policy, effectively, they're projecting a 2.6% inflation rate at the end of the June quarter. Market expectations are for around 2.7%. However, that was the number that we got in the previous statement on monetary policy in February. So it's probably a fairly trivial difference, whether we get 2.6 or 2.7%. Ultimately, the markets are pricing in a rate cut by virtue of the fact that this number, again, on the trim mean basis, should show that inflation is close to the middle of the target band. We got a little bit confused about the RBA's reaction function with its last decision because we thought it was shifting away from a focus on inflation to the labour market, which subsequent data has shown us that, clearly there's some softening there. But, clearly, it still wants to see the official CPI release. The forecasters are expecting that it'll come pretty much close to where the RBA thinks it's supposed to be at this stage in the cycle, and that should open the door, based on market pricing already, fully priced in for a rate cut at the RBA's next meeting. So if it comes in a little bit hotter than that, it might throw some doubt into that equation. But nevertheless, markets are basically expecting a number that will greenlight another rate cut.
And we will find out on the 12th of August. There was some corporate news this week. Macquarie received a first strike against its pay report. What does that mean?
I mean, it effectively puts the board on notice now, and of course, has I guess the proverbial Damocles sword over their neck for the next year as they try and sort of rectify the underlying issues here. Some of it was related to maybe slower returns than we've seen in the past. Obviously, investors are normally pretty happy for the executive team to pay themselves whatever they want if it's delivering shareholder returns. But ultimately, this is a matter of risk management. Obviously, there was a controversy 3 or 4 months ago, basically surrounding, regulatory risk and reporting. And the message is that, you can pay yourself well when you're delivering the returns, but if you're taking risks with shareholder value, then you don't necessarily deserve this kind of rich remuneration. So that's the signal, and now the board's basically on notice.
Kyle, markets haven't moved too much this week, but there's lots on the horizon with the tariff trade deadline on August 1 and, of course, the August earnings season.
Yeah, you could probably argue that we're heading to, if not the biggest, then one of the biggest weeks for the financial year as far as event risk. So you've got that August 1 trade deadline coming through. You've got, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon and Apple all delivering their quarterly results. A Fed decision, even incidentally, just outside the US as well. We've got the Bank of Japan, which will be fairly crucial to financial markets, and the non-farm payrolls at the end of the week too. So it's been a fairly quiet and arguably lackluster, maybe even kind of complacent week because we've got all this event risk coming up. But nevertheless, the back end of next week in particular should be quite exciting, if nothing else, maybe potentially volatile depending on what we get.
And Kyle, Donald Trump's attacks on Jerome Powell continue, this time at the Fed chair's workplace.
It looks like a pretty comical, maybe sort of curb your enthusiasm style of interaction. Obviously, there was that very sort of awkward exchange about, the cost blowouts and then, sort of a pointed jab about lowering interest rates. But, more or less, we've seen the Fed stick to its line that it's independent, that it'll set policy based on the data. I mean, the kind of calls from the US president for a 300 basis point cut to the federal funds rate is almost, comical. You sort of question, whether it's sort of a high-balling tactic or whether it's a statement made out of, pure integrity. But, nevertheless, although we did have that very awkward confrontation, maybe an attempt to strong-arm the Fed chair a little bit, the Fed is sticking to its line that it'll be data-dependent. And that kind of means that, although rate cuts are expected to come in the not-too-distant future, they're not rushing to do so, especially with the data holding up reasonably okay in the States.
Kyle, Rodda, thank you so much.
Thank you.
First Nations people are still being let down by Australia's superannuation system. 7 years on from the Banking Royal Commission, that's the finding of a new report that says an array of barriers are preventing many Indigenous Australians from accessing their retirement savings. Here's Adelaide Miller again.
From a small office in far north Queensland, Alex Price-Bush provides financial counselling to First Nations people. Retrieving their retirement savings can sometimes take years.
It's unfortunately incredibly common that a lot of First Nations people aren't able to access their super.
And no matter how hard he tries, some miss out.
For clients who don't necessarily fit the mould of how the current system is, some people just give up and go without essentially, so it's quite sad.
Those failures are highlighted in a new report by Mob Strong Debt Help and Super Consumers Australia, which says people living in rural and remote areas are particularly affected by rigid systems and discriminatory policies.
We're seeing a very inflexible and disengaging service from a lot of super funds.
Not having a process in place to use alternative forms of identification, for example, or having phone lines and different customer service supports that are in quite complex language, in languages that may not be the first language for many First Nations people as well. These all create a kind of layering of barriers that stop people from being able to access that money.
Just 69% of First Nations people have superannuation, compared to 87% of other Australians. They have a median balance of $22,000, which is just over a third of what other Australians hold. The research found only a quarter of respondents had access to a MyGov or email account, while just 59% used the internet.
We had one client who could not provide his ID, had no internet, phone, no utility bills to be able to prove who he was, and yet the super fund was still insistent on him just going online and just doing everything through that process.
In a statement, Chief Policy and Advocacy Officer of the super industry, James Covell, acknowledged the sector is deeply aware that for too long it has not met the needs of First Nations Australians. It has taken important steps, but more must be done. It comes 7 years after the Banking Royal Commission, which found the same systemic issues. Mark Holden from Mobstrong Debt Help says change is needed immediately.
That money can still be used as a form of intergenerational wealth generation for the communities that can go towards the community to help try to help develop them and help support them. But if those barriers in place there completely deny the community that ability to prosper.
Earlier this year, the government introduced new standards for superannuation funds, including the need for clear, respectful and accessible communication with members. The Assistant Treasurer and Minister for Financial Services said once the standards have been implemented, they'll consider whether further reforms are needed to improve services for First Nations people.
I think there needs to be a review of what's going on. So putting accountability back on the super funds through mandatory customer service standards will go a long way in making sure they actually have to help their customers access their money rather than putting up barriers.
Barriers that are taking years to break.
And that's all from Close of Business. I'm Alicia Barry. Thanks for watching.